devastating impacts throughout our community. The intense discomfort we feel as we consider this issue and its real-life consequences highlights the importance of taking time to honor both victims and survivors. It also serves as a reminder of why the City of Portland's role is so critical in the collaborative efforts in our community. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men have suffered domestic violence by an intimate partner. And it's estimated that domestic violence makes up about 15% of all violent crimes. Let's take a moment to let those numbers sink in. Because October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, we wanted to take a moment to recognize and highlight the work being done in our community to connect survivors and their families to safe and reliable services and other needed interventions. This work requires a high level of collaboration with service providers, local agencies, and advocates, all going about their work with a great level of compassion and sensitivity. Several of our panelists invited here today can speak in more detail about the coordination and partnerships it takes to best serve survivors and their families. I'd like to turn it over to the panel. We have the pleasure of being joined by Commissioner Sushila Jayapal, who co-chairs the Gateway Center Advisory Council. It's great to see you here again, along with representatives from the Gateway Center, Raphael House, and the Portland Police Bureau. Thank you for all being here today. Commissioner, I believe you're starting it off, correct?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Commissioners, for giving time on your agenda to this incredibly important issue. I am Sushila Jayapal, Multnomah County Commissioner for District 2. As the Mayor mentioned, I also serve as the co-chair of the Gateway Center Advisory Council with the Mayor. I also chair the county's Domestic Violence Fatality Review Team with Circuit Court Judge Patrick Henry. Domestic violence, or intimate partner violence, as this form of violence is more accurately described, has long been an issue in our communities, but has often been ignored as quote-unquote a family issue, and because it predominantly affects women. And I'll make a note that I will refer to women in my remarks here, but we know that this issue significantly affects men, affects transgender and non-binary people as well. We often think of intimate partner violence as physical abuse, but this is just one of the forms that it can take. Equally devastating forms include sexual abuse, emotional abuse and control, isolation, and economic abuse. Nationally, almost half of all women have experienced psychological aggression from an intimate partner. 1/4 have experienced severe physical violence, and nearly 1 in 10 have been raped by an intimate partner. And domestic violence disproportionately affects women of color. 28% of African American women report experiencing domestic violence, up to 60% of some counts of Asian Pacific Islander women, and about 23% of Hispanic and Latina women. Multnomah County data shows similar trends. 1 of every 7 women aged 18 to 64 was physically abused by an intimate partner during the past year. This means that almost 28,000 women in Multnomah County were physically abused by their partners during the past year. The ripple effects of this violence are widely felt across our community by those who are the immediate victims, as well as by family members, including the children who witness it. And these effects include economic impacts that can trap victims in abusive relationships and can continue long after the physical violence has ended, resulting in loss of jobs and housing. In the most recent point in time count for Multnomah County of people experiencing homelessness, more than 1/3 of those who responded to the question said that they had experienced and were fleeing domestic violence. Supporting the victims of domestic violence requires resources, partnerships, and collaborations across jurisdictions and systems, including the city, the county, law enforcement agencies, and nonprofit partners. It requires a deep understanding of the causes and effects of this form of violence and a response that centers on the experience and needs of the victims. And we are fortunate in Multnomah County to have those partnerships. The Gateway Center, founded and championed by Commissioner Dan Salzman, run by the city for the past 9 years, recently transferred to Multnomah County, is a model of that kind of collaboration. The transfer to the county gives us the opportunity to even better integrate the work of the Gateway Center with the broad spectrum of services provided by the county and to the nonprofit partners with whom we work. And now it's my pleasure and privilege to turn the mic over to Martha Strong-Morris from the Gateway Center to talk in more detail about that work.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Martha Strong-Morris, the Director of the Gateway Center for Domestic Violence Services. And I'm very pleased to be here this morning as we recognize October as Domestic Violence Awareness Month. As noted, in the world of direct service to domestic violence survivors, we're very lucky here in Portland to have many strong partnerships and collaboration. We have strong partnerships between the police and confidential advocates. We have a Family Violence Coordinating Council that is 50 members strong that meets monthly. And the 12 local domestic violence programs collaborate and share housing resources across agencies to ensure that the survivors that need the most get the services. And it's been my professional pleasure to direct the collaboration known as the Gateway Center, a collaboration between the City of Portland and Multnomah County, as the Commissioner noted. The Gateway Center opened in 2010 and represented a departure from previous models of service delivery for domestic violence survivors. Before the Gateway Center, domestic violence services operated almost exclusively from confidential locations. And the Gateway Center's location, in contrast, is public and widely known. Before the Gateway Center, survivors had to travel downtown to get a restraining order. And now, most applicants for restraining orders will get them in the comfort of the Gateway Center. From its inception, the Gateway Center has been a busy and bustling place with representatives from 15 different agencies, hoping to meet the needs of each survivor who walks through the door. Today, between 30 and 35 survivors will seek help at the Gateway Center. Most will come to learn about resources and supports that might be available to them. Others will come for restraining orders and safety planning. We have child care and children's services available, as well as specialized help with housing. For those who want to pursue criminal justice options, we can help with that too. They can file a police report at the center and meet with a representative from the district attorney's office without leaving the building. We even have an attorney that can represent them as a victim in a criminal case. We have some limited access to immigration legal services, which has been really vital of late. We also have legal aid with us providing civil legal services, that is help with divorce and custody. And I would like to note that the requests for civil legal services far overwhelm our ability to meet that need. The gap between those who need help in family court and those who get help in family court is one of the widest and most painful gaps we experience as a service system. In 2009, 10 years ago, Commissioner Saltzman had a vision about what survivors might need to get safe, to stabilize, and to thrive, and he reached across the river to the county, who agreed to join him in the efforts to open the Gateway Center. And together, we've literally been able to help thousands of adult and child survivors of domestic violence. And on their behalf, I want to thank you deeply for your support of the Gateway Center. I would also like to thank you for your support of the Domestic Violence Reduction Unit of the Portland Police. Their work to hold abusers accountable is extremely valuable and terribly limited. I recognize that PPB resources are stretched all over town, but I urge your support of the Domestic Violence Reduction Unit to keep survivors safe. Finally, recently, I've been thinking a great deal about how to participate in wider movements for social change and social justice. For Domestic Violence Awareness Month, I would encourage you to do the same with focus on the following 3 truths. First, domestic violence is the #1 driver of homelessness for those who identify as women. If we want to end homelessness, we must end domestic violence. Second, domestic violence mirrors institutional violence, and our collective work to end systemic oppressions like racism are deeply linked to the prevention of domestic violence. Third, institutional violence rests on a culture of dominance. We need to rethink the paradigm that seeks winners and losers, creates rich and poor, and divides black and white, and imagine a world where collectivism and partnership are the norms. Dr. Rion Eisler, the founder of the Center for Partnership Studies, has imagined that world. And I urge everybody to explore her work including her new book, Nurturing Our Humanity: How Domination and Partnership Shape Our Brains, Lives, and Future. The book shows how to construct a more equitable, sustainable, and less violent world based on partnership rather than domination. I thank you again for recognizing October's Domestic Violence Awareness Month. May your awareness ignite the energy you need to be an even larger transformational force in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. Good morning.
Hello, I'm Amy Ritter. I'm Executive Director of Raphael House of Portland. Commissioners, Mayor, it is a true honor to be part of today's event recognizing October as Domestic Violence Awareness Month. For more than 40 years, our organization has been a safe haven for survivors fleeing abuse, and we proudly help families for the long-term safety, stability, and independence they deserve. We're deeply grateful for working alongside the City of Portland, Multnomah County, and our many collaborative partners to support and uplift domestic violence survivors throughout our community. I thank all these incredible partners for sharing in our commitment to building a future without abuse. Sadly, we know that domestic violence affects far too many people in our community, people from all walks of life. Across our state, 1 in 3 women experience intimate partner violence. That's more than 700,000 Oregonians. And for women and girls of color and members of our LGBTQIA+ community, the prevalence of being targeted for abuse and violence is even higher. This is unacceptable. It's also why it's so critical for all survivors to have access to inclusive and culturally responsive services they deserve. Services that honor their unique experience and help them overcome barriers to safety and stability. We and our partners across the community are dedicated to providing these services and creating spaces where survivors can feel safe to reach out for that support. Together, we are helping individuals and their families thrive after abuse. And we're empowering survivors to shape their own futures and end the cycle of violence. Raphael House of Portland has been committed to this life-saving and life-changing work since 1977. For more than 4 decades, we have offered a safe haven to individuals and families fleeing domestic violence. Our confidential emergency shelter is a critical resource for seeking safety, providing 1/4 of the available beds for survivors in Multnomah County. We know that access to shelter and housing are essential to breaking the cycle of violence, because when survivors have safety and stability, they can begin to rebuild their lives. As a community, we have created a coordinated response that streamlines the domestic violence shelter and housing process in Portland to ensure that all survivors have an equitable access to shelter and housing and all of our services. Thanks to these collaborative efforts and our wraparound supports, more than 90% of survivors' families in Raphael House moved directly from our emergency shelter into housing. But the journey doesn't stop there. At Raphael House, we continue to walk alongside families as they grow into new homes and new lives. Each year, more than 380 adults and children stay connected to a supportive community of staff and fellow survivors through our advocacy center. In this space, we have created a safe and secure environment where all of our community partners can join us in working closely with survivors, providing specialized supports and services, including culturally specific co-advocacy. This programming helps families maintain their housing, achieve their long-term goals, and thrive. This is how we're all helping survivors make lasting change in their families, change that will have an impact for generations to come. Raphael House, our mission is to not only support in the aftermath of abuse, but to build a future without violence and oppression. Each day we work towards this as we help families end the cycle of violence for themselves and their children. Through a prevention education program, also a collaborative effort, we work upstream to change hearts and minds. Each year we teach thousands of young people and adults about healthy relationships and consent, so that one day no one's going to need our services. Thankfully, we're not alone. We're honored to be part of a wide collaborative of incredible agencies all working tirelessly to support survivors and make change in this community. I believe the collective impact and importance of these programs is being reflected in the words of those we serve. So I'd like to read this note from an amazing survivor who we've all worked with. Because of the support I received, I'm able to show my daughters love and provide them with safety every day. I'm teaching them and others about healthy relationships, that no one thinks that violence is normal, so that abuse will never be part of their future. I've learned so much at Raphael House. I want to share these lessons and make a difference. I know that there are many women out there like me who need help and are afraid to ask for it because of where they're from, or the language they speak, or how they've been treated by others. I want to say to them, you're not alone. Help is out there for you. Because of this help, I've had the opportunity to build a loving, beautiful life for my family. Everyone deserves this. Everyone deserves to feel safe and loved. Again, thank you, Mayor Ted Wheeler, commissioners, and the City of Portland. And thanks to all our wonderful partners at Multnomah County. Together, we're building a brighter future for survivors of domestic violence and for our whole community. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks all three of you for your testimony. We appreciate it very much. Thanks for the great work and the hard work that you do in the community. Commissioner, thank you for being here again. Appreciate it. We have one more individual, Captain Rodriguez. Two. And colleagues, just by way of maintenance here, what I'm going to propose is we have one more emergency item. I propose we do that this morning and get through the second readings. And if we can do it 9:34. And I realize people have to leave, and then move the rest on to the afternoon agenda. Good morning.
I'll be very brief. My name is Derek Rodriguez, and I'm the captain of the Family Services Division. And as Martha Strong alluded to earlier, I don't want to sit here talking about resources. But it's very, very important that everyone know that the number of domestic violence occurrences are not going down. And we can only triage so many cases. And unfortunately, we aren't able to investigate all of them. And it's horrendous stuff, and nobody should. So I would just ask for your continued support. Budget time is coming up, and the relationship that we have with Martha and the Raphael House and the Gateway Center, we do the best we can. The county has 3 contracted domestic violence advocates with the county, so there's a commitment that has been there, and we ask for continued commitment. So, thank you.
Thank you, Captain. We appreciate your hard work. Good morning.
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. My name is Ron Mason. I'm a sergeant with the Police Bureau's Domestic Violence Unit. I just wanted to say thank you for your support of this proclamation. We have more cases than we can work. It has continued to go up as resources have went down. However, we do have some amazing partnerships with both criminal justice agencies, county and state agencies, as well as our community partners that help us all to be more effective. So I just would like to highlight that it would be a disservice to go through all of them and leave somebody out, but there are some amazing people, some amazing agencies, and some amazing work that's going on, and we thank you for your support.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much. Thanks for the great work. Partnerships. Colleagues, next I'm going to read the proclamation. Beautifully done. I hope I can do it justice. Whereas domestic violence is a crime that touches the lives of Portlanders of all ages, leaving a devastating impact on women, men, and children of every background and circumstance. And whereas domestic violence accounts for a significant number of assaults committed in the city of Portland, and nearly 1/3 of Oregon women reported experiencing domestic violence, stalking, sexual, or physical assault. And whereas Portland has demonstrated a long-standing commitment to addressing this problem in partnership with Multnomah County, the District Attorney's Office, and many community providers. And whereas 10 years ago, the City of Portland, in cooperation with Multnomah County District Attorney's Office, the Multnomah County Circuit Court, and community partners opened the area's first one-stop center for domestic violence survivors, the Gateway Center for Domestic Violence Services. And whereas last year, more than 3,000 survivors of intimate partner violence found support at the Gateway Center, and more than 1,500 survivors were able to apply for a restraining order using the center's satellite courtroom. And whereas children who are exposed to domestic violence experience higher levels of adult depression and trauma symptoms, and are much more likely than children not exposed to violence to use and or tolerate violence in their adult relationships. And whereas, despite this commitment, far too many women, men, families, and children in our communities are affected by domestic violence. Whereas, the City of Portland recognizes and thanks all of the organizations and groups that are committed to address, prevent, and heal from domestic violence, often working directly with survivors to ensure that they have access to employment opportunities, housing, legal resources, and other services. Now, therefore, I, Ted Wheeler, the Mayor of the City of Portland, the City of Roses, do hereby proclaim October 2019 to be Domestic Violence Awareness Month in Portland, and encourage all residents to observe this month by gaining awareness of these issues and supporting organizations that work to address, prevent, help, and heal those affected by domestic violence. Gather for a quick photo here. Again, thank you to our panel. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Frame of 10 years, but obviously I don't think we can look at a longer scope if only twice in the program's history hasn't been used. One thing that isn't clear, and I think that we might all want to concern ourselves with is how will these set-aside units be connected with tenants? Different agencies have different waiting lists, and all those waiting lists are good, all those people are in need. But I think that the city should have, through the Housing Bureau, or in partnership with Home Forward, or in partnership with Aging and Disability Services, a consistent plan to triage and prioritize getting needy people into these apartments. I know there's a number of programs that are administered, but the need is obvious everywhere around us. The other thing that occurred to me, that I was very glad that the presenter specifically mentioned McLaughlin when the printout only says 50. Where's the 5200 block of South 18th? Well, now we know it's McLaughlin. I don't know the demographics of the whole city, but if the people that get this place happen to be people of color, how white of a neighborhood are they going into, and what sort of supports or having their back will either the housing provider or the people making the connection do. So when we talk about gentrification, some families are happy to move into areas where they're very much in the minority and take a chance. But as a city, I hope that whether it's through the Portland Human Rights Commission, through equity officials in Home Forward or the Housing Bureau, minority tenants always know that they can look at the city and make sure that if they go into an area where their minority status is maybe more obvious than it is in some other neighborhoods, the city has their back. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Carla, please call the roll.
Great. Fiscal year 1920 Community Engagement Plan.
Colleagues, the city and the United States Department of Justice entered into a settlement agreement in 2012 to make reforms to the way the city provides policing services, particularly as those services related to people with mental illness or experiencing mental health crisis. Let me just say that it has always been our goal to decrease and de-escalate interactions between police and those experiencing mental health crisis, and we continue to work towards that end. One of the many requirements of the agreement calls for the Police Bureau to prepare an annual report and present it to the council. That's the first item that we'll be hearing today. Another major focus of the agreement is to enhance the Police Bureau's engagement with the community. The city has made significant efforts to engage the community and has benefited from dedicated volunteers in this regard, both on the Community Oversight Advisory Board and on the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing, or PCEP. The work of the PCEP is governed by a plan developed with robust feedback from the community, particularly the Albina Ministerial Alliance for Justice and Police Reform. We're grateful for their continuing dedication and advocacy on these critical issues. The settlement agreement and the PCEP plan both require that the PCEP and the Police Bureau collaborate on a community engagement plan and that the council approve that plan. That is the second item that we'll be taking up today. You will find that the 2018 annual report is much different than previous reports in that it incorporates feedback received from the PCEP. In the past, annual reports were statistically heavy and didn't provide as much context. This report is more interactive and features links to other relevant documents and to the Bureau's open data page for those who wanted to do a deeper dive into crimes and data. In addition, Chief Outlaw has asked each division manager to submit information on that division's challenges and accomplishments, which provides a much fuller picture of Bureau activities. Turning to the Community Engagement Plan, it represents a step forward for the Bureau. It builds on existing community engagement efforts, and it's intended to be a living document that will evolve over time. The plan was created in collaboration with the PCEP and with feedback from numerous public forums. The Bureau's Equity and Inclusion Office and Community Engagement units also contributed to the plan. This plan contains goals and action items in 4 specific areas: public involvement, communications, access, and training. This plan identifies new outreach and engagement efforts that will be undertaken in the coming year, in addition to the many existing outreach activities being done every day. The Bureau will report back to the PCEP on its work over the first year of the plan and will collaborate with the PCEP to make the changes going forward. These changes will foster deeper and more meaningful engagement with the community. This is a key component of the Bureau's commitment to 21st century policing. My thanks to the PCEP and to Chief Outlaw and to her team for continuing work on the Community Engagement Plan. Today our presenters include Chief Danielle Outlaw, Lakiana Drury, who is the PCEP co-chair, and Vadim Mozersky, who is the Settlement Agreement Subcommittee. Are you the chair or a member? Member of the Settlement Agreement Subcommittee. Thank you for being here today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Chief?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm Danielle Outlaw, Chief of Portland Police Bureau, and again, I'd like to thank Lakiana for being here with me. It's my pleasure to be here today to present the 2018 annual report and the Community Engagement Plan. But before doing so, I'd like to reiterate the Mayor's comments. We had a great deal of input into both of these documents. My thanks to the members of the Portland Committee on Community Engagement Policing, as well as the members of the Albina Ministerial Alliance for Justice and Police Reform. I'm also grateful to all the community members who took the time and effort to come to our strategic planning, public forums, and provided insight. And finally, thank you to the many Bureau members who helped develop and craft these documents. I'll start with the annual report. The Police Bureau has always published an annual report, but it was a document that mainly sat on our website and was report of crime statistics and PPV general information. This year, or for 2018, based on the feedback from the PCEP's review of the 2017 report, I asked each of our R&D managers to detail their division's respective accomplishments and challenges. We took additional recommendations from the PCEP on what they wanted to see the annual report look like, and we implemented them. These included preparing the first draft of the report by June of 2019 to allow PCEP members to be able to comment. Also, they recommended that we add information on annual challenges and areas of improvement. This includes hyperlinks to applicable information found elsewhere, such as statistical data analysis directives and more. Also presented presenting this annual report to City Council as required in the settlement agreement with the DOJ. The only recommendation that we did not complete was listing our annual goals and priorities, and including assessment of the progress toward meeting them. That is because the Bureau's goals and priorities will be set by our forthcoming strategic plan, which we anticipate to be completed by the end of this year. So with the recommendation made regarding tracking our improvement metrics and self-assessing how we compared to those goals and priorities, we believe we'll be able to do that once the strategic plan is implemented in our regional annual reports. For some reason, I can't say strategic plan today. After receiving these recommendations, we wrote the report outlining the accomplishments and challenges that fell in the goals I established when I became the chief. As stated previously, we provided a link to our open data page on our website at portlandpolice.com on page 24 of the report, which gives users the opportunity to look at all crime statistics and refine them to their own neighborhood or specific geographical areas. In the report, we also included our significant progress on the DOJ settlement agreement and the numerous policies that were reviewed. The specific challenge that we faced was that our policy development team spent a large part of the year conducting the DOJ requirement of an initial review 6 months after DOJ-related directives had been enacted. Therefore, that limited the team's ability to address other policies. It is hoped now that they can turn toward the 100 directives that need addressing. It should be noted that the 6-month review schedule changes to annually now, which will help the team's ability to work on additional directives. We also continue to still be challenged in meeting our 180-day timeline for the completion of internal affairs investigations. We recognize the procedural justice implications inherent in these delays and the toll it takes on all of those involved. And we continue to work to reduce this timeline. And I'm actually optimistic that this has since been resolved or will be resolved. Also last year, we had 6 officer-involved shootings. We understand the use of deadly force impacted our efforts to build and maintain trust in the community. We will continue to focus on our robust review process, communication, training, and policies to further improve trust and legitimacy in our communities. In regards to staffing and our personnel, staffing remained our biggest significant issue, with each division citing it as a challenge. That, combined with special events, planned or unplanned, greatly impacted and affected our personnel. For example, during some of these events, there was a delay in responding to priority 1 emergency calls. Because responding to emergency calls for service is the #1 priority, specialty units, like the traffic division, continue to provide rotational support 25% of the time. This impacts their ability to address their workload in those divisions. As we continue to hire and train new officers, we know staffing issues are going to remain for some time. And because of that, we realize the Bureau has to be far more innovative and embrace technology to use our resources most effectively and efficiently. As an example, the Bureau implemented the beginning of a more collaborative policing model where divisions come together to combine resources to focus on significant crimes and livability issues. The Gun Violence Reduction Team is an example of this. Also, PPB made great strides in data-driven policing, rolling out Tableau software to assist precinct and division leadership in fulfilling my request to use data to inform resource deployment. As it relates to recruitment and hiring, the Bureau continued to be challenged with the length of time it took to process applications. However, to address this, Bureau personnel spent considerable time reviewing our hiring processes to look for efficiencies and enhancements. This included incorporating new technology, implementing timelines for various stages, and evaluating factors that can reduce this timeline without sacrificing the integrity of the system. Another challenge remains in recruiting diversity for the PPB, and it's also a priority. We began to look at our recruitment and hiring efforts through an equity lens to better understand any barriers for hiring diverse candidates. Also along the lines of equity, The Bureau continued with our implicit bias training, which every sworn member knows. We implemented procedural justice training, which is now, I'm proud to say, incorporated into every aspect of the Bureau's policies and training. And finally, the Bureau embarked on the strategic planning process, which will focus PPB's direction for 5 years. The many public forums and listening sessions provided great feedback and insight. We participated in numerous events as well as hosting open houses at each precinct and the traffic division. We also created new barbershop and salon forums to better engage the community in smaller groups to have productive discussions and receive feedback. We're also keeping better track of these activities through our new community engagement app that officers use. All of this is just a snapshot of what's in the report, but once again, I want to thank everyone who was involved who had input in this particular document. Shall I go on to the community engagement plan?
Are there any questions so far about the annual report, Commissioner Hardesty? Sure. Did you want us to continue through the community engagement plan first?
What's your preference, Chief? It's up to you. That was all I had to say for the annual report.
I mean, if
Why don't you go ahead and ask your questions now?
Thank you, Chief. Thanks, Mayor. And thank you for a report that's easy to follow, that's easy to read, and has real numbers in it. I am greatly appreciative of the improvement in the annual report. Having said that, I have a couple of questions. Many of these I spoke to you about, Chief, when you met with me in my office, so it won't be a surprise to you that I'm asking these questions. My first question actually has to do with one that I didn't ask you, which is, what is the difference between the Metro Gun Task Force and the Gun Violence Reduction Team?
So the Metro Task Force is a smaller facet that works within, under the umbrella of Detective Operations Division. So those are officers that are assigned to a task force with other officers from the agency, and together they conduct criminal investigations throughout the region. The Gun Violence Reduction Team is responsible for now investigating all shootings that occur here in the city.
So does that mean the Metro Gun Task Force is a subset of the Gun Violence Reduction Team?
It means it's a subset within the division itself. So no, not necessarily. They may work together, but it's not a subset specifically of the GVRT.
So, thank you. So one of the questions I asked you when you were in my office was my concern that I can no longer track now whether or not the same people are being targeted for gun violence reduction, that were being targeted for gang enforcement. I've noticed in your annual report that there are places that you talk about gang activity, yet because of the new way that you're counting, I can't hold you accountable for what you told me last year about the gang enforcement unit. How internally are you tracking that data to determine that these now gun violence reduction officers, which there's 24, 26, something like that, are these officers doing the exact same thing they were doing when they were part of the gang enforcement unit? And if they're not, what is the difference between what the gun violence reduction team does and what the gang enforcement team used to do?
So when you and I talked, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, you were talking about or asking how are we going to continue to track stop data?
Yes, and how do we actually hold you accountable from 1 year to the next? Because when you change the name, all of a sudden we're tracking something different than what we were tracking the year before.
So we'll continue to track the same information. However, given that we send the gun violence reduction team officers to respond to additional types of calls, the types of statistics have changed. So it doesn't mean that it's going to be apples to oranges. It just means now that the GVRT, with the additional types of crimes that they respond to, are now tracking in a different way. So we expect to have the GVRT stats, I hope, all inputted by either the end of this month or early November. So then that way we can include their stop data results with the rest of the reports that we have.
Thank you. I also mentioned that I was surprised that in your annual report that I didn't see any mention of hate crimes because I've been told that Portland Police Bureau actually investigates hate crimes. Is there a plan to add that? And you mentioned that trafficking also was not part of this annual report.
Yeah,
Are there
so,
other parts that I didn't mention that also are missing and that will be part of updates?
so I think, and for both of us, and I misspoke when I shared that, so if you go to page 14, under the investigations branch, it talks about how many bias crimes were investigated. It says 14 potential bias crimes were investigated, and of those, 8 bias crimes were identified. So it does touch base on how many we received and accepted, but I don't know how much further detail you want as it relates to that.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what that means. I mean, bias crimes could cover a whole range of activity. I would be very interested in more demographic data around what does that mean? Who is being impacted by hate crimes in the community? And really, what hate crimes is Portland Police Bureau investigating? Because there seems to be a conflict between what the DOJ investigates, what the state of Oregon investigates, and what Portland Police Bureau investigates, or I need to be clear about what's Portland Police Bureau's responsibility in that.
Infrastructure deficit in a number of those intersections. What I learned was they were intersections like any other intersection, built out, but because of the number of lanes, because of some bad habits, because of inadequate barriers in terms of people making turns, people were dying in those intersections, but it wasn't the result of an inadequate investment in basic infrastructure.
I will have to agree to disagree on that, but thank you. One last question has to do with, as we talk about really the needs of law enforcement and where we need law enforcement to be, we still will need to talk about school resource officers and whether that's the most appropriate place for them to be, or whether they should be actually on the street patrolling our neighborhood. We should also be talking about whether or not paying to have Portland police officers provide transit security for TriMet in the 3-county area is something we should be doing under these current conditions, because I am also troubled that we have officers, but we have them doing things that may or may not be the priorities for the city of Portland today. So again, thank you for your hard work. I greatly appreciate the report, but I look forward to having more additional information as we continue on. Thank you.
I just want to acknowledge a couple of things. I want to ask questions. As the police commissioner, I'm familiar with what's in the report, but I also want to give the bigger picture again. Remember, we are understaffed in the police bureau. And so part of the reason that over a period of many, many years, the traffic enforcement division has been reduced is we have prioritized other areas over that function. And it's a legitimate question as to whether or not it should be reprioritized. But I also want to give this chief credit for making some very difficult decisions in order to improve recruitment for the Portland Police Bureau. And so far, at least one of the major changes that Chief Apple has made, at least in the near term, seems to be generating considerably positive results in terms of the number of new recruits that we are seeing after a period where those new recruits seem to have plateaued. We seem to see a regeneration of interest. I also want to thank my colleagues. When a year and a half ago, the chief and I asked for additional policing resources, you'll recall it was a very controversial question. The council supported that, but I want to remind people that there are training and certification standards that take almost 2 years between the time that we make a decision to fund and the time that people actually come on board. And we've been more flexible in terms of how we deploy resources. For example, the public safety specialist program is another example of how we have sought to change things. With regard to traffic enforcement, I want to remind everybody that there is another option that isn't just about deploying more police officers to traffic enforcement, although personally I support that. I want to know what the trade-off is in terms of what we are then reducing support for. But we, as a city, prior to my getting here, made a commitment to cameras. And that commitment really wasn't lived up to, because it turned out that in many regards, state policies, practices, and regulations for us. In other words, a police officer has to be, a certified police officer has to be the one reviewing that video and making sure that at the end of the day, what's on the camera is a legitimate citation. And it's my understanding that other states have different ways of organizing that, different ways of arranging it. I believe there were conversations with the legislature this year that ultimately were not fruitful. That's a conversation I think we can continue to have with the legislature. And Chief, one area where I expect to see improved results in large measure because of your leadership was on auto theft. We'll all recall that a year and a half ago, auto theft was the issue du jour. It was on the front page of every newspaper. People were outraged to learn that you could literally just tell a police officer, my friend Joe lent me the keys to the car and I have no idea who Joe is or where he is or anything about this car, and you could effectively avoid prosecution. We went to the legislature, we changed that law, and it would be my expectation that the 7,000 or so incidents that are reported in the 2018 report, we'll start to see that go down as enforcement goes up. That would be just a couple of my expectations. I also want to thank you, Chief. The goal here isn't to write a report that only data analysts can love and appreciate. Really, we want it to be accessible to the community. And while this will be an evolving document with time, I think this is a really, really big step in the right direction. And I appreciate the hard work you and your team put into it.
Thank you.
Any further questions on the report before we move into the community engagement? Very good. Lachlan, are you up next?
I don't think so. We can go at the end.
Okay.
However you guys
Yeah,
want to do it.
yeah.
So turning to the community engagement plan, I think it's monumental for us at the Portland Police Bureau, as this was our very first plan, and it's a living document, and it will continue to evolve. It was created in collaboration, again, with PSEP, and from feedback from the strategic plan public forums. During its development, members of the PSEP had 3 recommendations, and PPB adopted all of those. The first one was to change the mission statement of the Office of Community Engagement. And then they also asked that PPB demystify the policy process. I think that's rather fair. And then we also agreed to work with the mayor and city council and relevant bureaus to create a truth and reconciliation workgroup based on the recommendations made. This plan identifies new outreach and engagement efforts that the Bureau will be undertaking in the coming year, in addition to the many existing activities Bureau members already undertake. There are 4 key areas outlined in the plan. The first is increasing public involvement with ongoing opportunities for meaningful community engagement and inclusion. Next is expanding and improving existing communication strategies and techniques. Then ensuring accessibility to the Bureau for all communities, including those with limited English proficiency or physical challenges. And then enhancing the knowledge base of both PPB and the public to better serve the diverse communities in our city. PPB, as shared before, will report back to the PSEP on its work over the first year of the plan, and will collaborate with PSEP to make changes going forward to foster deeper and more meaningful engagement with our community. This is a key component of the Bureau's commitment to 21st century policing, and it's a great start. As I said, this will continue to evolve and develop. I think even over the last couple of weeks, we've seen some areas where we could be more engaging, specifically as it relates to our young people in the community as well. Thank you again to everyone who contributed, as well as Bureau members, but specifically our Community Engagement Unit and our Equity and Inclusion Office, who are committed to working on this plan from the start and will continue to move it forward.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Wheeler, for having us, and City Council, Chief Outlaw, also for inviting us to be a part of this. I'm really proud of the PSEP committee for being able to take on these issues in our first year and be able to give input on both of these plans. I think that was really important, and went through a number of processes to engage the community and provide a public platform for them to be a part of this as well. It's positive to see that PPB took a lot of these recommendations and incorporated them into their plan. I think that's really important, and as the Chief had mentioned, that more time in the future for these plans will allow us to even further provide feedback We just had our meeting last Tuesday and heard a lot of.
Lucky, and I'm sorry to interrupt, could you do me a favor? And could you introduce yourself
Yeah.
for the record, and just for the benefit of council and maybe some of the folks here, could you give us a few sentences about
Yeah.
yourself? You're a volunteer, you've stepped forward. I personally really appreciate
Yeah.
your leadership, but tell us a little bit about yourself and your name for the record.
Yeah, Lockie Drury, co-chair of PSEP,
And what does that mean?
Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing. Thank you, Commissioner. Sit on the steering committee, just really passionate about engaging the community, making sure that we're holding the police bureau accountable, and also, you know, finding this fine line of being a bridge for the police and the community to engage. And that's really what we've worked on in this first year. There's a lot of tasks that we've had to take on. And that's just why I said I was really proud of us that we were able to get to this in addition to all the other things that we're trying to do, some of which I can address in a little bit.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. As far as the community engagement plan, we held our meeting last week and we were able to get additional feedback from the community on that. But it was great to see that platform, a couple of things that they had mentioned. Just making sure that all PPB facilitated boards are public. It was brought to our attention last week that the Behavioral Health Unit Advisory Committee does not hold public meetings as the other PPB facilitated boards do. So I think that's something that we can continue to work on and make sure that people have access to them. The accountability was in the annual report, but wasn't mentioned in the community engagement plan from what we saw. So just making sure that you know, that's a #1 priority for us as well. I'm glad Commissioner Hardesty brought up the GVRT. This is the exact kind of information the community's been wondering too, is like what was that transition from the gang enforcement team to GVRT? And so tomorrow we're going to be holding a public meeting on gun violence in Portland. It's at 5 p.m. at Highland Church, and we'll be hearing from the GVRT about that specific issue, about what that transitions look like, allow the community to have their questions answered, and then make recommendations for how GVRT can better serve the community. And yeah, we want to do similar things on that with, in regards to the upcoming PPA, Portland Police Association collective bargaining agreement, and make sure that there's a space in there for the community to have their voice heard. I know you guys had a work session on it yesterday and it sounded very positive, and we look forward to working with PPA to create more spaces, inform the community, and really foster that community engagement.
Thanks, Lucky.
Anything you want to add, Vadim?
Yes, hello. My name is Vadim Zersky. I'm familiar with several people here, but personally, I bring to this table advocacy for disability rights and inclusion of people with disabilities in policy making, especially with the police department and the history that's involved there. From a personal standpoint, I want to thank the mayor as well as the commissioners here for bringing together the diverse constituency of PSEP. I think we have various backgrounds and various philosophies on how to communicate with the police department and the way going forward. What I've been glad in my time with PSEP to learn is how open everybody is to input from the public, input from the police bureau, as well as input from city employees and the Justice Department. I think PSEP is doing a great job in bringing all those inputs together and formulating recommendations to the police department, police bureau on ways to integrate those recommendations. So with respect to that, I want to echo what's been said today. There is a need to have more data. One of the recommendations made by PSEP in the past has been to have a trend as to how the data has changed over time, and that's been reflected today through Commissioner Fish and Commissioner Hardesty asking for that kind of data. As Commissioner Hardesty is saying, we need a data-driven approach to decision making, and I think that's absolutely correct. And so that's what we're looking for, and for accountability as well. The police bureau has done an admirable job of providing representatives at our meetings who can answer questions. The police chief has been there on several occasions, as well as the assistant police chiefs. And we do appreciate that. Sometimes questions are asked by the public, which we don't have the answers to, but we do have people at these meetings attending that have those answers, and I think that is very important, and I hope that presence continues. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We appreciate your service. Commissioner Hardesty.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, I asked when you were in my office, of all the organizations listed that the police spend time with, my question was, what are the hardest meetings that Portland police officers go to in an effort to build community?
That's a new question.
That's the same one. I just expanded it a little.
I won't be able to. Well,
the reason I ask is because, we talk. I know the African American Advisory Committee has been dysfunctional for almost 2 decades. And that it is really well attended. People don't know it happens. I'm sure that there are other committees that operate the exact same way. And so I get concerned when I see them listed as, oh, this is all the part of what we do. I understand the youth stuff, right? Because who wouldn't want to hang out with cute little kids and play sports stuff, right? But the hard work isn't the work hanging out with kids playing basketball. The hard work is really dealing with the racial history of policing in the city of Portland. And so when I look at where police are being paid overtime to invest time in the community, I'm very concerned that that doesn't match up to what we say our goal is, which is to build deeper relationships. I mean, playing ball with kids is fine, but that's not where the problems are. The problems are in how do we engage people who are adults. And so I would love to have a priority list, knowing that you can't do all these volunteer fun activities because you have limited staff. What are the priorities for this year? And how are you gonna make sure that the right officers are at those events?
Okay, so ask you that, so I won't have to call you.
I did ask you about it. What is the hardest
Yes.
meetings you go to?
So acknowledging that some of these advisory committees do need revamping because some are more well attended than others. But I also want to point out that there is cross-representation in some of these other groups as well. So just because one particular advisory committee is poorly attended does not mean that issues pertaining to that one particular demographic don't get raised at other meetings. But I will also acknowledge that, yes, we do need to go back, and I would like to go through all of them. And also, I mean, we have a lot of advisory committees, as do other bureaus as well. And I'd also like to see how we can leverage our partnerships with the Office of Community and Civic Life as well, who also maintains advisory committees, to see if we can address all angles.
And I wanted to remind the listeners that this community engagement plan comes out of the 2012 settlement agreement, which was supposed to be done, 160 days after the settlement agreement was affirmed. So we are now in October of 2019. And it was supposed to be a plan that was led by the community with input from the police, with input from community organizations that actually engage with the police. And so this plan was put together. Chief, I stopped it before you came because they were trying to do it before we hired you, which I thought was stupid, and the mayor agreed, so we stopped it. So I just want the community to understand that this is not a Portland Police Bureau vision. This is something that was mandated by the DOJ, and it took us a very, very, very long time to even get to a draft. My concern is that once again, this is led by the police and not led by the community. I went to one of the earlier community meetings that was supposed to be gathering community input into a community engagement plan, and I wasn't the only, everybody at that meeting was really ticked off because the way the information was presented made it sound like the facilitators had an outcome that they already had predetermined. And so all the people in East Portland who came to that particular meeting to actually have input into the community engagement plan left very frustrated. We were all promised that people would get back to us and we would actually have an opportunity to re-engage, and that did not happen. And so I just want that to be on the public record, that while I appreciate the beginning of the community engagement plan, it is not the plan that was envisioned by the Department of Justice or the community back in December of 2012. Thank you.
Anything else?
I think one more thing I forgot to mention I think would be great to just highlight in the annual report, I think it was the annual report, Anyway, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that PSEP had proposed, I think this is a great way to address the historical legacy of racism in Portland, especially around policing in all institutions here in Portland, and it's something that we look forward to helping work on in the future.
I hope that's gonna be led by a community effort and not being led by the police.
Absolutely. I hope to.
Great. Does that finish your presentation? I just want to say this, first of all, Chief, thank you. And Lakiana and Nadeem, I want to thank you. In large measure, you are the community representatives helping to drive that process, and I thank you for it. I do have sort of one surprise question for both of you.
Sure.
The last time we were in front of Judge Simon, he gave you accolades for the good work that you're doing on PSEP. He indicated that he thought you were demonstrating independence from myself as mayor, from Chief Outlaw and the Police Bureau, but he also indicated that he was somewhat concerned, and other members of the community indicated they were concerned there wasn't more community involvement. People weren't showing up in the kinds of numbers that one would expect, and I know you've done things to try and encourage that. Where are you with that, and how can people get involved if they want to come and participate in what you guys are doing?
Yeah, we hold our meetings the last Tuesday of every month. Community engagement is a challenge, ongoing. It's something that we're working to do. Meetings like we're having tomorrow night, where we're engaging on topics that the community's interested in, are our way of doing that. And it's going to take some time. I think there's a lot of apprehension about where PSEP was going, and I think the best way we can do it is by producing results that the community is looking for. I think there could definitely be some support in the form of possibly a staff member. I know that it was part of some plan to maybe have a community organizer. Just in the work that we're doing every month, we're spending at least 20 hours of volunteer time, close to 20 hours depending on the month and the member. That's at that level, just to bring everything together. And now to go out and do community engagement is, in addition to what we're already doing, is challenging. So I think a staff support or something like that would be helpful. But in addition to that, what we're already doing is working on the issues that the community cares about. I think that'll address some of it as well.
Yeah, good. And I'll make this commitment again. I've already made it to you a couple of times, but I'll make it again.
Same glasses.
I know Nicole Grant from my team, who's been heavily engaged in this. We want you to be successful for a lot of reasons. You establish your own agenda, which is something people may not understand, so it really is a community-driven agenda. But we would like to see more active participation from the public at large. And I know you guys are really working hard and busting your chops on your own dime as citizen volunteers. So I want to thank you for that. And if you have proposals that you'd like to give to me that you think might further community engagement or community involvement, I will absolutely carry that to this council. And I think you would find a receptive audience.
Thank you. Anything you want to add, Vadim?
No, I definitely in my time, I've seen more people involved. In the last meeting, probably had about 50 community members. It comes and goes with respect to what's on the agenda. But for anybody out there listening, the website describes all of our meetings. If you just Google PSEP, it'll come up. And it's not just the people on the committee that are making these decisions and helping out. We gladly offer and accept the help of community members to sit on our subcommittees, to hear their voice and their participation, and to bring their background and knowledge to the table as well. So,
and before I get to Commissioner Hardis, could you give us some idea what some of those subcommittees might be, just to potentially pique some people's interest?
Yeah, so we have a policy agreement subcommittee, we have the youth subcommittee, which focuses on engaging youth, which, by the way, we have 2 youth members that sit on the committee, race ethnicity committee, and then a committee for persons with mental illness. And so between the 4 of those, there's a lot of opportunity to get involved and for community members to sit on them, which they already do.
Thank you, appreciate it. Commissioner Hardis?
I actually did not have an additional question. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you. Great.
Thank you.
So we have, we'll take testimony on the resolution. How many people do we have signed up?
Possibly 6.
Very good. Bring the teach name for the record, please.
Are Jan or Maggie here? All right, then we'll go with Dan Heckleman, Debbie Iona, and Robert West.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your patience.
Good
Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler. I'm hoping since we have so few people testifying, that maybe I can get 4 minutes to testify this afternoon.
3 minutes, please.
I'm Dan Hamlin from Cop Watch, and we appreciate the opportunity to testify about these important items. The 2018 annual report reads a little less like a public relations document than the 8-page infographic report that came out in past years. To the Bureau's credit, they note the impact of 6 officer-involved shootings on the community, but they ignore the death and custody of Richard Berry. There are also no statistics about use of force, the main focus of the DOJ agreement. There are multiple mentions of policing protests, but none about PPD's use of force at those events. Unlike the IPR report, the Bureau does reference the OIR Group's 2018 report on deadly force incidents, but there are no specifics about the changes made to PPD practices as a result of that report. There are also no statistics on discipline. Even when those numbers appear in the IPR's report, the Bureau should put in those data and reference IPR for more details. PCCEP recommended this change as well. This is the first presentation of the PPP annual report to City Council since the DOJ agreement was finalized in 2014, even though it's been required by the agreement all of these 5 years. The precinct presentations were poorly promoted, poorly attended, and from what we heard, poorly run. As for the community engagement plan, another requirement of the DOJ agreement, we hope the city doesn't feel the meager efforts listed in the resolution today are sufficient community outreach to finalize the plan. It lists the specific days the Bureau engaged with PCCP at a few subcommittee meetings, which don't even have more than one PCCP member at them sometimes, and portions of the 2 full membership meetings, including one that took place 6 days after the resolution was drafted. We do appreciate, though, that the resolution recognizes the City Council has to approve the plan, which is important since all of you are responsible for the Police Bureau, how the Police Bureau functions. It is also good that the text leaves open the idea of modifying and updating the plan on an annual basis. It will be argued that PCCP meetings were the Bureau's public input efforts. However, generally speaking, there are about equal numbers of community members and PCCP members at these meetings, about a dozen of each. This is indicative of the Bureau's poor understanding of community engagement, that today's hearing was announced with 8 days' notice, which is not enough time to get more people here. The key recommendation that was mentioned is a plan for a Truth and Reconciliation program. But what it actually says in the plan is they will actively engage with Mayor and City Council, relevant bureaus, and other civic leaders to develop a work group to explore the creation of a Truth and Reconciliation program. So that's 3 layers deep into the goal. And it doesn't acknowledge that truth and reconciliation can't come without the end of the behavior that leads to the process. In South Africa, apartheid fell, but no part of the community engagement plan promises to end police use of deadly force, racial and economic profiling, violent crowd control tactics, or other issues that are causing the rift between community members and the police. And I guess the last thing I would add is that the plan calls for the creation of a Hispanic Advisory Council. The old one disbanded after the officers who killed Jose Mejia Pope in the mental hospital in 2001 were given medals. And I think until that is reconciled, you should not
I'm Debbie Iona, representing the League of Women Voters of Portland. The League shares the aspiration stated in the resolution that, quote, meaningful public engagement involves the ability of community members to affect policies, practices, and PPB culture, thereby improving outcomes and eliminating unconstitutional actions, end quote. We believe, however, that the Bureau could be doing more to connect to the public through its communication practices. The League has already shared with the DOJ, PPB staff, and the PCCEP our concerns about the methods the Bureau uses to inform the public. We believe there is room for improvement in the PPB's communications about important policy considerations, events, and opportunities for participation. As an example, when the annual report was scheduled for precinct presentations, a good place to start would have been reaching out through the email lists for the many PPP facilitated and participatory advisory committees listed in Appendix A. Connecting with these groups might have drawn a larger audience. After all, the annual report is meant to provide an overview of the Bureau's accomplishments and challenges, so it should be of interest to community members already associated with these advisory groups. The PPB also should consider adopting some of the techniques used by other city bureaus. Many provide sign-up sheets at community meetings where they gather contact information for future notifications. In addition, there are links on project websites where the public can sign up to receive information. When we shared our disappointment about the lack of notification for the precinct meetings, Bureau staff responded that the information was on the website and recommended signing up for the media alert system. The alert system requires creation of a password, a barrier for some. Furthermore, we understand that the alerts include media notices about criminal activity and are not necessarily devoted to the types of policy issues that interest members of the public who might want to provide feedback. We recommend that the Bureau build email distribution lists and use them in a tailored fashion to get the word out when there are opportunities to engage in policy discussions. It should be more proactive and intentional in its communication techniques rather than relying on members of the public to come to them to find opportunities to learn and participate. And at the last PCCEP meeting, I noticed that the two staff people from the Bureau are sworn police officers who are doing this work, and I wonder if the community engagement team would benefit from having somebody who is trained in, public outreach and communications in their office. Thank you.
Great, and Debbie, if I could just respond, because I think you've given us a very clear roadmap here, some great suggestions. First of all, I want to thank you as being one of the people who does show up on a regular basis, and you do participate, and I want to thank you for that engagement. I never want to speak for the chief. Her job is hard enough without me speaking for her, but I do know that they've made substantial changes to the PIO function recently in order to better engage with the community and provide additional information. And you've offered some very, very good suggestions here with regard to being proactive, being intentional, and building on the relationships we already have in advisory groups. And so I will take the notes you've written, and if you want to give me your written testimony, I'll make sure that we get that to the PIO, because I think they're good suggestions.
Sure, well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, Debbie. Good afternoon.
Yes, my name is Robert West. I'm with from the police, and I hope Joanne Hardesty pays really close attention to what I have to say. This thing about the gun violence reduction team that I keep hearing about is actually Gang Squad. I see them going out every night and pulling over people of color, searching their cars. There was a shooting in Southeast Portland on like 50th where it was a white shooting a white. There was no gun violence reduction team. The only detectives that showed up was people from the robbery division. And I still find the gun violence reduction team / gang squads still patrolling the same areas that they do when they're looking for gang members. I asked one of the officers, what's the difference between your job now and then? He goes, just the name. They switched it just because of the name. They're doing the same thing out there as they've been doing. And it's pretty sad when they sit there and they switch the names so that they can get people to sit there and say, hey, we got this nice new name, now will you support us? And it makes me mad when I sit there and I see a car pulled over and they want to search it because it's blacks, and then I see cops pull over a white vehicle, and it's like, well, you're speeding, you got your driver's license, go back to the car, run the name, go back, give them their driver's license, and send them on their way. I've seen several times where they've sat there and said, we want to search for weapons. That's typically amongst the blacks and the Hispanics. You don't see that with the Brew. I've very seldom seen the Brew or EK that were stopped where their vehicles were searched. And Gang Task Force doesn't even usually show up on those. But like I said, in Southeast Portland, a white guy shot a white guy in a robbery, and there's no gun violence reduction team that showed up. And that literally shocked me because, one of detectives told me that they show up on everything, and they're not. They're showing up in areas of color. So that's what I wanted to bring up.
Last person who signed up is Charles Bertrand Johnson.
Good afternoon, thanks, y'all. And especially thanks to Clerk Carla or whoever, Chief Outlaw and her staff, who made this PDF look great, even on the tiny screen of my phone. So it was good to hear that we've grown, that we respect the public enough to do a 20-some page PDF instead of, as was previously cited in the earlier testimony, an 8-page thing that seemed a little bit hackneyed to some people. This is important work, and one of the ways we know that it's important work is because one of the people that was killed by Portland police, Quanis Moose-Hayes, has a family member here. I'd like to thank her for her diligence in working with the community and, for lack of a better phrase, working with the police department towards improvement and better accountability, and especially the prevention of violence and death from the hands of people trained to protect and serve us. One thing that would be interesting is not necessarily the role of the police, maybe some of the organizations, whether it's League of Women Voters or Copwatch, that maintain records about those people who have been killed by police, is to have the timeline, because I don't even recall if Chief Outlaw came in before or after any particular shootings, say the Quanis Moose-Hayes shootings or others. So as we sit here in a city that may be going on its third or fourth one-time white borough mayor, we've had a single-term mayor with Sam Adams, we had a single-term mayor with Charlie Hales. Depending on what people believe about the ability of this town to have the police preferably live in this town and also live up to the community values, may determine whether we finally get a 2-term mayor after however long it's been since we had one before. I especially appreciate Chief Outlaw's candor and directness in acknowledging that 6 of our neighbors died from shots fired by police. I'll have to talk with Mr. Handelman more about the other type of death in custody. I don't have the Copwatch experience that Mr. West has to talk fully about his situation, but when I think about a Metro Guns task force, the first thing that comes to mind is that in this metro area, we had guns on the roof of a parking garage that were going to be aimed at me, and I don't know if any police officer identified and recorded the serial number of those guns, tracked their trafficking, knows that they were involved in other crimes. There was certainly probable cause to do so, to at least record the identity of those weapons, if not seize them. I hope that when we look at equity and racial considerations, we'll know how many guns were seized and tracked from people of color versus how many were seized and tracked from people that were not people of color. Thank you very much. I'm sorry my time's expired. PIO, milkshake, really? The PIO and the milkshake, there's definitely room for improvement there. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chief. Did you have any other closing thoughts? Very good. I'll entertain a motion on the report.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Hardesty, a second by Commissioner Fritz. Please, this is accepting the 2018 annual report of the Portland Police Bureau, item number 943. Please call the roll.
Fritz?
It's really great to get the report. I like its new format. It's very clear, and I particularly appreciate the reference in the report to a 2019 report coming fairly shortly. So I know that your intent is to get them back onto an annual basis in a timely manner. Thank you very much. Thank you for the comments. Bye.
I also want to add my thanks to the chief and her staff for actually developing a report that gives us an opportunity to really get a insight into the work and the day-to-day operations of Portland Police Bureau. I couldn't help but look at the annual report and have that open while I was reading the auditor's report about police overtime. And so as I look at both the gang violence, because the auditor's report is actually tracking gang violence, that is being, that Portland Police Bureau is responding to. And so I look at the over 50,000 in overtime that was spent around cases involving quote-unquote gang violence. And I also have to acknowledge the fact that if 58% of the arrests are of people who are houseless, we really need to change our priorities as far as the police force and actually focus on solving crime and actually not make people criminals who are suffering because they can't afford to live in our city. And so I vote aye, and I look forward to working with the chief to make this report better and to have it really reflect what's happening on the ground in our community.
Well, I want to thank everybody in the police bureau who was responsible for collecting this data, for presenting it in a way that I think is fairly easy for people to digest. Again, this is a baseline. It will continue to improve with time. And if there's one disappointing thing, Chief, is that you have to start somewhere. And so we don't have a lot of longitudinal data, particularly for areas where we're starting to collect data in a different way, or in some cases maybe collecting data for the first time. And this certainly came out in the response from the Police Bureau to the overtime audit, that we have actually engaged and started to do many of the data collection procedures that were actually identified as potential strategies in the audit. And so I want to applaud you and your command staff for being data-driven, and with time, what we will have is longitudinal data. We'll be able to determine whether or not the investments we're making, the strategies we're pursuing are actually the best and highest use to build in the resources, both dollars and cents and human resources that we have. And we'll see what results we are getting with those dollars. And so I appreciate your efforts there. I vote aye. The report's adopted. Next item is the resolution 944 for the community engagement plan. Please call the roll.
So Mayor Wheeler and the community oversight body, some people don't know that part of the reason for that is that the staffing of that body is not only with assistance from his office, but also through the Office of Equity and Human Rights. Our work in that office is mostly internally focused and has we've greatly appreciated working with Elle Weatheroy, the Equity Manager in the Portland Police Bureau, and the work that she's done with the Community Engagement Office. I think there's great opportunity for more partnership between the Police Bureau and Office of Community and Civic Life. Once they have reorganized their community safety program, we have lost a lot of experienced people in that, working in that capacity. And so that is an obvious opportunity for more collaboration. The community engagement plan is a framework. It's not a this and only this, it's a starting point, and essentially I think we all agree that we want more people participating in every realm of city government, including police oversight. So thank you very much for the report and the plan. Aye.
I thank Chief Outlaw and her team for putting together this community engagement program, even though it was supposed to be done in 2012. It is important to acknowledge that some of these community engagement activities are merely having ice cream or hanging out at a sports event with young people. Some are meaningful conversations that went through either race talks or some other formal process where we're actually really building really deep, honest relationships. It is my hope that the Bureau will prioritize where they will spend their time next year, because I don't believe you will be able to do everything that's in your community engagement plan. So the question is, what will benefit the community most, and how do you prioritize that over the year? I will vote to support this plan, but I will be monitoring throughout the year to ensure that we're just not putting down numbers because Sunshine Division gives out X number of tons of food, that we're actually putting down work that we're actually involved in and responsible for. I vote aye.
There is no bureau that receives more scrutiny than the Portland Police Bureau, and in order to rebuild the trust and expand the trust, that already exists between the police bureau and the community. It requires the community to be actively involved. And I want to particularly applaud the individuals who have volunteered on Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing, Lakiana, who is here, Anim, who is here, and many others who participated in that process and volunteered their time and their energy and commitment to what is mostly a thankless but extremely important process. And so I want to acknowledge that and thank you. I think this plan is a good start, but as with the annual report we saw, it's a beginning step. It's the beginning, it's the base foundation of what I hope will be an evolving process, and it will become richer, it will become deeper, and it will become more meaningful as the community engages further and as that trust continues to build, because that's really the important thing, is trust. I vote aye. The resolution is adopted, and I thank everyone for their